Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's presentation. I'm going to get the PowerPoint started. Our topic this week is communication in groups and teams. Here are our focus questions. Why are groups and teams becoming increasingly popular in professional life? What are the potential strengths of group discussion? What are the potential limitations of group discussion? And to what extent should leadership be assigned to a single group member? If a patient wants to die when the medical procedures could save him or her, should doctors follow the patient's wishes? A woman whose health makes carrying a fetus dangerous to her nonetheless wants to become pregnant, and she asks doctors for a fertility treatment. Should doctors provide the treatment? These two focus questions are to help you think about how important decision making in groups can be. Now let's look at what the overview is for this week's chapter. First, how basic communication skills apply to groups and teams. Second, to identify potential strengths and weaknesses of groups and teams. And to look at aspects that aspects of groups that can affect communication. And then the last two are effective methods of group decision making, and finally, guidelines for effective participation in groups. We start with defining a group. Now, in order for a group to exist, people must interact. They must also be interdependent. This means that they are relying each other to accomplish their goals, which brings us to the fact that they need to have a common goal and they need to have some rules of conduct. And a group has three or more people. If there's only two people, we call that a dyad. So three or more people. Now, from this definition, we can see that if people are hanging out at a bus stop, they're not a group. They could meet at the same bus stop every day because they're going to the same place to work, but they don't have a common goal. They each individually want to go to their own workplace or their own school or their own place to shop or to go to the gym or whatever it is, right? But it's not shared and they don't depend on each other. If any of them is absent, doesn't show up that day, it doesn't stop the other person from getting on the bus, right? So there has to be that interdependence. I have to need you to get my goal done, and you need me to get the goal done, as in group projects. Now, a team is a special kind of group. Um, it it's it's a kind of group where people have different skills that they bring to it and different competencies, maybe even different perspectives. But their differences that they bring to the group are resources for the groups. So they are able to work to get more accomplished because they bring these different strengths to the group. And a team typically has a much stronger sense of collective identity. They're proud to be on the team. They like being on the team. Similar to a sports team. I know many of you have probably played in a sports team. Some of you may have been in theater, and that's a team that puts together production. Some of you may have been in a band. Some of you may have participated in other kinds of groups where you've come together. Some people may have been involved in this past election and helped to register voters or to get literature about various candidates, right? So teams come together often for specific goals, specific projects, and they tend to have a stronger sense of identity than just a group. Now, in the workplace, groups and teams have become very, very important. And there's different types of groups and teams that can happen. You can have a project team. So a workplace could have a specific project that people are are pulled together, and they could even be pulled together from different departments to do this project and get it done. And so they're a temporary collection of people that do this project, and then the team ends because the project ends. Then you have another type of group that's called a focus group, which is a kind of group that researchers interview to get information on particular research questions. There's also brainstorming groups where people come together to come up with different ideas. And ideas could be for solving a problem or initiating a project and or program or things like that. There's also advisory groups. So these are people that are pulled together to give advice. They're typically people who have a lot of expertise. I serve on an advisory group for an organization that does peace building in Nigeria. So they call me and they ask me to participate and give ideas for teaching mediation skills and other kinds of things like that. There's also quality improvement teams. So these are teams that get pulled together in an organization to help figure out how to make improvements in certain kinds of functioning of that organization. And then there's decision-making groups. So decision-making groups could be ongoing groups like a team of surgeons and or a team of teachers. It could even be a group of students. The student organizations on this campus do a lot of decision making and engage a lot of work in projects. So those are the types of groups and the different kinds of situations, and we can see a lot more of them in the workplace as well as in other kinds of organizations. Now, in a group or a team, each group has its distinctive goal, whatever that is. It's something at work, a team playing a sport, a group of students trying to finish their group project, right? They have a goal. And there are different kinds of groups. So some of the groups that exist are social groups. So you have a group of friends that gets together and you exist to support each other and to share your life and your activities, to have fun, to support each other through hard times and so on, right? There's also groups that are personal growth groups where people get together and talk about issues going on in their life and where they are with it, get support, advice, or just people to listen to them talk about what they're going through. So there's groups for people getting together, getting over addictions, people trying to get over loss in their life, people trying to just improve themselves, become better at anything, whether it's school or in their personal life, be a better partner. So there's all kinds of personal growth groups. And then there's task groups, which are people that come together to accomplish tasks. This is very, very common in the workplace. In fact, that's probably the major kind of group that you'll have in a workplace. But you even have it in school. We have student organizations, we have clubs that are trying to accomplish tasks, as well as when you are in a group project for a class, you are also trying to accomplish that task of getting that project done. Now, within a group, there are three kinds of communication that happen, and all of them are important for the group to be able to accomplish its goals. So the first is called the climate. And the climate is the kind of communication that tries to maintain and enhance the mood. So we do things like um, just greeting each other, asking people how they're doing and checking in and letting people know that they're important. Also, when conflicts arise, climate people can try to help people keep calm and keep focused, and they're regulating the mood of the group as opposed to trying to just solve the problem, right? Then you have a kind of communication that's procedural, which is guiding the process of interacting. So things like helping people take turns, decide what the process is for decision making, um, decide what constitutes a good contribution versus what constitutes just distracting the group and so on, right? So these are procedural things. And then finally, there's the task kind of communication, which is focusing on getting the job done. Whatever it is the group has come together for, that's what they want to focus on. And things about like who's doing what are you going to do specifically, and so on, putting that stuff together, right? So these three kinds of communication are really important. You can have different people that are guiding these different types of communication. They don't all have to come from one person, but one of the keys to being a really good group leader is to know how to facilitate meetings and actually be able to do all three of these different functions, which take different kinds of skills. So there's lots of room for growth in becoming a good group leader uh, by just focusing on communication, right? Because you have climate, you have procedural, and you have task types of communication. Now, climate, to get into more detail here, is creating and maintaining a, a constructive atmosphere where people are appreciating being there and appreciating each other, right? You can think of climate as like the weather. It creates the conditions under which a group is able to function, right? So some of the things that you can do to create a positive climate are to acknowledge people, so that acknowledging when they come into the room and also acknowledging contributions that they're making to the conversation. Also encouraging, so finding ways to get more people to participate and to, ask questions and direct people to, say, hey, we haven't heard from you. Why don't you chime in? What are you thinking? Right. So that would be encouraging. Then validating. So looking for what's good about a person's discussion contribution so they feel comfortable and feel appreciated for making those contributions, right? So validating and then also even just noticing the contributions is a way to help people feel validated. Cheering, literally telling people what a good job they're doing as they contribute, whatever it is they contribute to the group. And then reconciling conflicts. Now, this is more complicated because it involves a lot of different skills. But in a nutshell, what you want to do is listen to the people express their opinions, their experiences, and their feelings, guide people towards finding some common ground, and then helping people find solutions, right? Now, I said that really quickly. We have a whole entire class on conflict management and mediation. So if you want to learn more about how to resolve conflicts effectively and be a good leader for helping people solve conflicts, I highly recommend that. It's Con 340, and we do a good job of teaching it here at CSUCI. And another thing that helps with the climate is adding humor. I don't think there's a culture in the world that doesn't appreciate humor, but we Americans, we really like humor. So finding ways to find humor in situations is a way to make people feel comfortable and also sometimes to get through some more challenging situations. So that's climate communication. Now we move to the procedural. So the procedural communication is what guides the discussion and helps people stay on track. It makes sure that you're covering the agenda. So if you want to be in charge of the procedural communication, it's a really good idea to have the agenda. You can also facilitate creating agenda at the beginning of the meeting by asking people what they'd like to cover today and then making a list and then organizing that list, right? It doesn't have to just come from one person. You can also do it in advance and go around and get ideas from people what to put on the agenda to have it ready for when the meeting starts. So then once the meeting starts, then you are coordinating member comments. So it can be helpful to have one person that calls on other people when it's their turn to speak, just to keep things in order. It's very common at meetings for people to raise hands, especially the more people you have, the more you might want to have that be the case. The fewer people, the less you need that. But being able to make sure that everyone is recognized and everyone gets its turn to speak is really important for strong procedural communication, right? Another thing for procedural communication is making notes and recording what people are saying and keeping track of the progress on meeting goals. So, there's an organization called Interaction Associates that developed a really effective process for facilitating meetings, and they wrote a book called Making Meetings Work, which you could get online really cheap right now. But they recommended that you have one person keeping notes and actually keeping notes on a board or on a big piece of chart paper so people could see what's said, so that people would know that what they've been said is acknowledged, and it'll help people relax because they know they've been acknowledged. And then, so regulating turn taking again is making sure that everyone has a chance to speak and then finding a way to do that smoothly. So that's procedural communication. Now, task communication is communication that focus on the tasks on hand. So a way to be good at task communication is to initiate ideas, also to critically evaluate the ideas, and then to clarify people's understanding. So you know that everyone's on the same page and everybody has an understanding of what's being talked about. And you can actually, to have an effective meeting, according to the people who were the founders of Interaction Associates that I was telling you about, Michael Doyle and David Strauss, they thought it was a really good idea to divide up, having one person be in charge of the process and other people being in charge of the task, so that it's not all just one person and everything gets covered and you do a better job with it that way. So that's just an idea that I'm throwing out there because I did a training with them and I thought their process was really, really excellent. And I've used it in different organizations that I've been in and different teams that I've been on at universities where I've worked. Now, egocentric communication is communication that undermines groups. So it's a kind of communication that you really want to uh, try to squelch and or prevent, right? So it's the kind of communication that's distracting. People who are clowns, we all like to laugh, but a clown is someone who is constantly trying to draw attention to themselves to make people laugh and can actually um, interrupt with getting the job done that the group is there to get done, right? Because the clown just wants to call attention to themselves. And there's other people that are just making comments to call attention to themselves, and um, they're not trying to help the process, right? So you can do that by devaluing others, putting their ideas down. So you put them down as people, you could put down their ideas, okay? Bragging also doesn't help group processes. Dominating and not letting other people talk is also something that will undermine the group. And then finally, interrupting people, not letting them finish their turn at talk, right? Now, these things can happen. Anybody can engage in these ideas when they're triggered, when they get upset, when they have strong disagreement and they don't want a decision to go through. And sometimes it takes self-reflection to see that, oh my goodness, I think I'm doing this, right? And you want to try to avoid doing it yourself, but um, a way to try to manage it is to actually to draw attention and just make observation comments and and also to ask people what's what's going on for them, are they upset? Why are they doing this? And then try to get more to the heart of the matter because sometimes people engage this behavior because they're threatened, right? So you want to try to minimize and redirect this kind of communication because it really does detract from accomplishing the goals that the group is set out to accomplish. Now, groups have their strengths and they can be great for coming up with more ideas and more creative ideas and more innovation, right? But some of the limitations are that there is more time needed for group processes. And because of all that time, it can frustrate people. And there's also a problem where individuals may feel suppressed or they may feel encouraged to conform to what the other members of the group wants. We call that groupthink. So these are problems. And then finally, there's a problem called social loafing and even another problem called free riding, which I hear students complain about a lot, which is where you have a few people doing the work and then you other people that are just kind of hanging out and not contributing, not doing their fair share. A free rider does nothing. A social loafer just does the minimum. So these are things that give groups a bad name and sometimes make students not want to work in groups. But with the high functioning group, it can be one of the most wonderful experiences that you'll ever have, either in college or in the workplace, because of that ability that groups have to be more creative and to have more ideas than an individual does by themselves. So here we are now to the strengths, right? So with the group, there's more resources, there's more ideas, people can bring more information, they can bring more creativity. And there's something that goes on with groups where people people's ideas stimulate each other. Like my idea stimulates your idea stimulates another person's idea, and so on, right? We call that synergy. And groups have an ability to be more thorough because you're able to analyze an idea from different perspectives. And there's heightened creativity because you're bringing more ideas to the table. And sometimes there's more creativity just because people are enjoying the process so much that they're opening up more ideas than they would if they were just sitting alone. And then there's an enhanced commitment. So people are motivated to be there for other people and more motivated to get things done because they're in a group. And that's one of the reasons why you'll see so many people at the gym doing group exercises because people can be more committed to doing their exercise when they're in a group, right? So same thing with work. People are more committed to doing things because they have other people to connect to and relate to and be accountable for. Some features of small groups now, all right? So one of the things that can be positive about small groups is that there's cohesion, right? People stick together, but the downside is what we call groupthink, where you're just going along to get along and you may overlook problems and some of the great disasters, like the Challenger disaster, the Bay of Pigs invasion, all of those things have been attributed to groupthink, where people are not carefully analyzing and they're afraid to criticize another person's idea, and that can lead to negative outcomes. Another feature of small group is that there's is the size. So if the group gets too large, it's no longer a small group, right? And it's much more difficult to manage and for everybody to be included in the participation. So you have to be careful about groups not getting too big. And then there's different kinds of power that can be in a group, right? So you can have what's called power over, where you have some people dominating other people. So it's like they're on top of people. That's why we call it power over. And they're trying to force their way onto the group. Another type of power is power two, where you're trying to empower everyone in the group to be able to accomplish the goal together, right? So there's more equality with the power two as opposed to the power over, right? And then another feature of power is people trying to get more power. So they're engaging in social climbing, trying to connect to the power brokers and find ways that they themselves can just increase their own power. So these are some of the features of small groups. We move now to interaction patterns. So sometimes interaction patterns are very centralized. So people communicate in a way that everyone's getting the information through keeping the information together and maybe even having coordinator that brings it in the information together, and then that central coordinator gets the information to all the people in the group. Other times the interaction patterns are decentralized, and we've seen that happen a lot more now because of the fact that we can do stuff online, and we can you have a lot of organizations are letting people work at home, or you have something called hybrid work where you're at home some of the time and then you're in the workplace some of the time. And we even have hybrid classes like that, right? So this would be decentralized where people are delegated responsibilities for making decisions and doing things on their own, and they could bring it together later, but they're not constantly together in a centralized way working together, right? But the work is getting spread out into different places, literally could be different locations because of the phenomenon of people being able to have online communication so they can just be home and then connect when they need to, right? So that would be decentralized. All righty, now we're going to talk a little bit about power. So there's different types of power that people can have. And depending on if the group has a hierarchy, like at work, where you have the boss, and then you have the different people that work under that boss, right? And you can have several levels of management from the CEO down to the vice president to managers and so on, right? Moving down the hierarchy, right? So when you have a hierarchical organization, then some people are able to give rewards. So bosses can give rewards like promotions, raises, praise, and so on. Um, so that's all reward power that motivates people to do things because of the rewards that they'll get, right? And in a hierarchy, then you also have the opposite of people being able to punish. That's coercive power. So you punish with demotions, firings, or undesirable assignments. Then you have people who have a kind of power that's called legitimate power. So they have the power because the organization gave them that particular position, and they have the responsibility over things because of their position. So your supervisor, your manager, and so on. So that's called legitimate power when you have that power because you were assigned that role. And then some people have power because they're experts. So in an organization, people might not be a boss, but people might go to them because they know they have a lot of knowledge and experience and they are respected for that. And you might see that even in school amongst your students, your friends. Some students are better in some subjects than others, and people might go to them to get some help from that, right? They have expert power. And then you have something called referent power, which can be seen as um, having a kind of personality that people enjoy being around. And so people that are charismatic and enjoyable to be around, they have influence over others because people want to be with them. So that's called referent power. So those are the five bases of power, how people can get power in a group. You may see if you have group projects in class that the main kinds of power that will get expressed are expert power and referent power, right? So some students are just very likable and people like to be around them because they make them feel good and they have referent power. And other students maybe have some power because the students recognize that they really know a lot about the subject matter in that particular group project. Now we're going to talk a little bit about group norms. So there's a couple of different categories of norms in groups that we're going to talk about here. And norms are the ways in which people interact, and um, they are present in all groups, but there's two types, right? So there's a kind of norm called a trivial norm, and there's a kind called a substantive norm, okay? So a trivial norm are minor surface level behavioral expectations. They don't really significantly impact the group's core functionings, but they are related to social etiquette, right? So there could be a dress codes, ideas about punctuality, or even seating arrangements, right? So those are kind of norms. I notice in my classes that students dress a certain way, and also I noticed that once students sit in a seat the first day of class, suddenly that becomes their seat. Well, they never paid rent, right? They didn't buy the seat, right? But it's just a norm, right? It's what you expect. And those kind of things happen in meetings too, right? That people think that, this people are going to sit certain way, or there's certain sort of ways of dressing and so on, right? Then there's deeper norms that are called the substantive norms, right? These are more impactful norms. They influence the fundamental aspects of the group and how it functions. They pertain to how decisions are made, how conflicts are resolved, and how members collaborate to achieve group goals, right? So, trivial norms are important for maintaining social harmony and for people to feel comfortable, right? So, people know what to expect, and people don't want to be criticized about their performance or productivity. So you want people to feel comfortable, right? So requiring members to greet each other before a meeting starts can be a good way to create a pleasant environment. And sometimes people have regular practice or ritual before that, right? How they greet each other. Maybe they all grab a cup of coffee and have some snacks before a meeting starts, right? So that's trivial, but it makes people feel more positive about being there and puts people in a more productive frame of mind. Now, the substantive norms are also important because they're essential for the group's long-term success and effectiveness. So those are the norms that dictate how group members must actively contribute to discussions, and that dictate that decisions must be made in whatever way, whether it's by voting, consensus, or some other process, right? And also to try to be inclusive with communication, right? That's important for the group to function well, okay? Now, the trivial norms have an impact on group cohesion, right? So that's how close people feel to each other. And even when superficial norms are violated, right, they can create some discomfort, and they could create some awkwardness that lead to other issues. So an example could be if a person consistently forgets to say hello and just jumps into talking about the task without asking people how they're doing and so on. People could feel like they're being made to feel less significant, right? So they might then feel some resistance to people's ideas, right? It could create some problems. And then the substantive norms have an impact on group cohesion as well. And violating those can lead to significant conflicts or breakdowns in the group functioning. If there's a group norm about equal participation and that gets ignored, and some members dominate the conversation, that can result in resentment and disengagement by other people, right? Now, trivial norms tend to be more flexible, and they can be adapted or changed without as much disruption to the group dynamics. For example, allowing a casual dress code instead of business attire is unlikely to alter the group's performance, or just letting somebody dress a different way than other people isn't really going to affect how people can communicate, right? But the substantive norms, these are harder to change because they form the backbone of the group's operations. So if you alter those norms around decision-making process or roles within the group, it requires more planning. And if you don't get buy-in from all the group members, it can create disruption or conflict. So you have to be careful about that. Um, some examples of trivial norms are arriving on time or refraining from using your phones during the meetings or having a certain kind of seating arrangement. Some examples of substantive norms are expecting full transparency during decision making and adhering to a collaborative approach or maintaining confidentiality about sensitive subjects that might be discussed, right? So those are some examples of the norms. So in sum, what I've said about norms is that they help to maintain a pleasant and socially acceptable environment. Um, if they're trivial and if they're substantive, they play a critical role in how the group functions. They directly influence decision-making and problem-solving and collaboration. So understanding and maintaining the substantive norms is essential for any group aiming at sustained productivity, effective communication, and maintaining the trivial norms helps people continue to feel comfortable and to have a supportive climate. All right, now we move to methods of group decision making. So the first type we're going to look at is when you use a standard agenda. And I think a lot of you have probably seen these in meetings. And they originally came from John Dewey's problem solving process. So what you do is that you define the problem, or the goal, right? You gather information, evidence to accomplish that goal. You establish criteria for a solution and you select and implement the solution. And then later you evaluate the solution. So this is a very rational, methodical way to approach problem solving and getting goals accomplished. What I notice happens a lot is that people will talk about the problem. They'll rush to then immediately trying to figure out the solution without gathering enough information and evidence. And then they'll pick too quickly because they haven't established their criteria and so then they're not really evaluating the ideas on whether or not they meet the criteria. And I'll give you a really good example. One of the reasons I went to grad school is because I worked for an organization that went bankrupt as a result of a terrible, terrible decision. The company that was a natural and bulk foods warehouse that would deliver foods to these smaller stores around the San Francisco Bay Area. And one of those stores, the one that we had the most sales to, was going bankrupt. They were going to shut down. So we were really afraid of losing all of those sales. And then, potentially that could hurt our business. So we didn't want to lose it. So a couple of people in the organization that were very dominating pushed through this idea that we needed to rescue that store. And um, for some reason, they thought we could do it better than they were and make it work. So we like put in the money to rescue that store, and lo and behold, within 6 months, we were bankrupt because nobody had taken the time to analyze, to gather information and evidence to find out why that store was failing. They had incomplete information and they couldn't stop the problem. So the main reason that store was failing was because of too much theft. It was on Haight Street. If anyone knows that street, it's a street that's kind of famous as like the hip center of the hippie community, and still people go there and try to do that. And they didn't know how to stop the theft. So they bought the store, went bankrupt in 6 months. It was really sad. But I went to grad school to study communication because I realized what a terrible decision that was. Okay. So you need to think, gather information, evidence, do your research, establish your criteria for what's a good solution before you just jump in and decide. And then you select it and then you evaluate it later. If your ongoing group or team that has to keep making decisions, you should be constantly evaluating your solutions and how they're working out. Now, the second um, decision-making process is called the nominal group technique. So this is a good idea if you have a lot of people and also, where it's hard to have everyone participate at the same time. And also, if you have some people that maybe are shy and don't like to share their ideas out loud, and so their ideas are getting overlooked because the extroverts are doing all the talking. So with the nominal group technique, you introduce the situation and you explain it, and then you let people silently generate ideas. And then after people silently generate ideas, you can go off and do it alone. You could come back, you could have a piece of paper and everybody write their ideas down. Then you share the ideas, and then you have a group discussion. So that's really good for helping get more participation. And it is really good if you have introverts in the group that don't normally feel comfortable talking in that group setting, right? And then after the discussion, then you can do voting and then ranking the ideas. So I don't think that this has to be exclusively done. Like, I think you can combine it with Dewey's method because you'll notice in the nominal group technique, it doesn't talk about um, getting information and it doesn't, getting more information. It doesn't talk about setting up criteria, right? So I think you can add this silent generation of ideas and sharing ideas. And then you can also use voting and ranking. So I think the more people you have, the more you might want to use voting and ranking. And the fewer people you have, the easier it is to just use consensus and have people talk until they agree on something, right? All right. Then we have a slide here about digital media and groups. So groups are operating more and more in the workplace through virtual conferences and through computer networking. So we have Zoom and other platforms that help people communicate, right? And then also people are using text and email a lot and so on, right? So groups are doing a lot now through computer technology. And the challenges for virtual groups are that there's limited nonverbal communication. So you have to be really careful, especially with writing, because when you can't see people's nonverbal communication, you can more easily misinterpret what's being said. And when you don't meet regularly, it can really put constraints on building relationships. So we really saw this during COVID when people weren't meeting and people were feeling really isolated and lonely and increased depression, anxiety, and so on, right? Because people weren't building relationships. So even without COVID, if people are working virtually and not coming together, it can just curtail the kinds of relationships that can get built. And when people have stronger relationships, they're more comfortable working together and they are more open and honest and can do more effective problem solving and be more creative. So I think that sometimes that could be missing if you're not meeting more, if you're not having face-to-face communication. So you have to think about that if you're trying to do nothing but virtual communication online, right? All righty. Now, some guidelines for being effective with groups is first of all to participate constructively. So to do that, it really helps if you understand how to do task communication, how to do procedural communication, and climate communication. And then it's also really important to try to avoid engaging in egocentric communication and to learn to manage it when it happens, right? So in addition to the conflict management class, we also have another class on 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 innovation in teams. And that is a really great class for learning more and learning a lot about being an effective team leader and how to actually have effective communication groups. So that's a great class to take if you want to be a manager or get into leadership in any organization. I highly recommend that class. Some more guidelines are to provide leadership. You don't have to be the boss to provide leadership by knowing how to establish a good climate. You can become an informal leader, and also by asking people questions and encouraging people, or if your boss is overlooking people, raising your hand and saying, "Hey, we haven't heard from so and so for a while. How about we hear what they have to say?" Right? You can speak up and make observations about what's going on, right? You can provide leadership even when you're not the boss. And then being able to manage conflict constructively. So knowing what disruptive conflict is compared to constructive. So disruptive is when people aren't listening to each other, when they're invalidating each other, putting each other down, not listening to their ideas, and so on, right? Where constructive conflict is when people really listen carefully and try to acknowledge differences, and then try to figure out what are each set of the conflict participants, what are their goals, and how can we try to manage and also get solutions that meet everybody's needs, right? So good, effective meeting facilitators are able to do these things. They're actually good conflict managers. So if you want to be in leadership, I highly recommend the conflict class and the collaboration and teams class to teach you a lot more. So one presentation on this is not going to give you all the skills, but it does give you an idea what are all the skills that are required so you can look more into it and find more ways to get all these skills. All right, then. In sum, what we've talked about today is small groups, how they operate. We've defined groups. We looked at the many factors that influence teams and groups, and we put out some guidelines. So I hope this is a taste of what is involved in communication that motivates you to want to learn more and get some more skills in group communication.